And as far I have already introduced Anna Ackermann, she is the policy analyst in the organization, but you know what Anna's work was outstanding, that she has been for quite a long time heading the Eco Action. This is one of the leading actually Ukrainian NGOs that has been working on the environment for quite a while, and they're the leading voices of our civil society in Ukraine that has been advocating for the environmental conservation, but again with heading all of the fight for environmental justice as it is. And Anna for quite a while has been leading it, and now she is the distinguished board member of Eco Action, but her experience is much broader, and I think you will be able to see it during her speech. So thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Evgenia. Thank you so much, and thank you for the very kind invitation. It's a pleasure to be also talking after Svetlana. Just a few words. Here, I also was thinking how to make this presentation, and I tried to put together many things at once. On one side, because of my personal experience, to be honest. Svetlana mentioned I'm an expert in energy security. I think to be an expert, you have to be working for decades on a certain topic. But I was. So my first master's degree that I received in Ukraine was power engineering, so it's energy related, and the diploma was on thermal power plants. So you will see some photos of thermal power plants in Ukraine, and you can imagine that for me, for some people who study certain subjects, for them having, seeing things from their experience being destroyed, this is painful. For me, seeing thermal power plants, now energy system getting destroyed is terrifying. But I will be talking about this a bit more. And indeed, then, my second master's was also partially in the University of Manchester, and I'm very glad to be here. And I was focusing in my research, my second master's degree, on the development of the energy system of Ukraine through time. For the sake of time today, I'll be only looking, and this is why there's just a limitation of this presentation, but then we can have more discussions. This presentation will be about Ukraine's transformation since Russia's 2014 invasion, and where we were there and where we are today. But then in my master's thesis, I was looking into, different aspects in our dependency as a country on Russia. And I was not thinking at all from the perspective of decolonization, but this topic became really prominent with time. And now I think we have to also be looking into it and trying to understand why we developed in a certain way. And I wish I looked into that during my master's thesis, and I hope that there will be more people looking into that, because it's very important, very relevant. And of course, the climate policy part is where I spent many years working in Ukraine on climate policies in Ukraine. I'll also give you some perspectives on that. So it's just a mix of personal experience, but also again because these topics are interconnected, and they lead through from local to global perspective and the other way around. So Tana talked a lot about climate change as such globally and what it means in Ukraine, and I think I will be also addressing the thing where things are happening in Ukraine, what it means for the world, which is also crucial. And then also there is also a lot about geopolitics now, and I mean it's clear. I think we all feel that. So. And my presentation will be built in 3 parts. I think I have too many slides. It's too bad. I try to prepare it well, but it's mostly photos, graphs, and so on, less text. So energy first, then climate, and then a bit on decolonization. This is what you can expect in the coming minutes. So we start with energy. And the energy sector is not that simple. We also can break it into different parts. Electricity sector, coal, gas and oil, and nuclear. This is what I'll be taking you through. This is the destroyed thermal power plant in Kharkiv. And this is when I see this, my heart breaks down. When this happened, I was with my child in Disneyland abroad. And while my child was enjoying the lovely music here outside, I was, almost about to cry. Just understanding how horrible it is, because this means no electricity for half of Kharkiv, where I was born to. But energy is a really important topic, and Ukraine is in this cross-section of the world's, in a way, civilizations. First, the electricity system. So again, I'll be taking you through how, because I understand not everybody is working on this topic, so I'll try to show you how things are, and again, focusing on the immense changes that happened since 2014. Ukrainian energy system was built and is, of course, very much bound to the post-Soviet Union borders. It was this electrification plan to build up, huge. This is basically what you see here is the power lines connecting countries in Europe, but you see the very thick ones connecting, Ukraine and Belarus to Russia. And that's because we had, very big and centralized production of steel. We needed energy for that, built up throughout the 20th century, and we need, this big capacity to be interchanging with other parts of the ex-Soviet Union. So by 2014, and still by 2022, February 2022, Ukraine was linked to Russian electricity system. We did have some interconnections here, but the main ones were going here. And I don't know if you've heard the term ENTSO-E. So Europe has its own system of electricity operators that work together, so they can, monitor which electricity is needed where and cooperate. And Ukraine was not a part of that. Ukraine was a part of the, by February 22 still, even after 2014, the part of this post-Soviet blocs. But we were moving, after 2014, it was clear enough, we had to be moving out of that. And so after 2014, Ukraine started, moving toward having more connections and connectors to Europe. And that was really, really important. When you look inside at Ukraine, this is the map of our power generation back in 2014. The red spots are the thermal power plants, the black are nuclear, the blue are hydro, and there was some, but very, very small still, solar, mostly in Crimea. Some of the first solar power plants were built in Crimea, and a bit of wind, but not at all a lot. So most of the electricity, we had like more than half of electricity being produced from nuclear energy, maybe 1/3 from thermal, then hydro, and a small bit from renewables. And again, this was built to be very much centralized. So all of the power plants, they're really large. This is just another way to show it. But here I wanted to also show you, this is also like power plants, but just with other colors, sorry for that. What I wanted to show you is that we were, so 2014, we were very reliant on fossil fuel and nuclear energy, right? But then the renewables started growing quite quickly. Ukraine introduced the feed-in tariff. First it was, I will not be going into details anyway, it changed through time. And renewables, you see here, solar and energy started growing quite well. But there were other important changes that happened, is that with the feed-in tariff, there was more and more households who started having also their own solar power plants on their roofs. And you can see here, well, here, I realized that in 2014 we had almost close to zero, households with solar PVs on their roofs. By the end of 2021, we had more than 40,000, and it was an exponential growth, and it still continues today. Unfortunately, we don't have the data of today because we just cannot get this information anywhere. This was, and by then, at some point I was comparing to England. I mean, at some point here, England already had 1 million solar roofs. So, much more. England, sorry for that, the UK had about more than 1 million, but we were moving very well. It was fascinating to see. However, I mean, the system again, it was this very centralized system with huge capacities and so on. So then, what we experience now is awful lots of destruction, and of course, first what Russia did when they started targeting the energy system, they first were targeting the connectors, the grid. And then they started targeting, and we saw this throughout last year and closer to this year. So they were 23, 24, they were targeting the generation capacities. They did not target nuclear power plants directly, but they were still targeting, the connectors near nuclear power plants. And then you have all of the types of destruction all over the place, including the Kakhovka Dam. This was the most terrifying thing that ever happened to us. Kakhovka Dam, the occupation of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, destruction of solar PVs, which were actually growing, and they helped a lot to provide electricity in the south of the country. And then they saw that last year in summer, and they were also targeting, solar generation. This is the destroyed operation block at the thermal power plant, hydro turbine destroyed, and so on. So this is what has been happening. What was the answer of Ukrainians? How does it look like now? So we have more and more decentralized energy system that is built all around to produce electricity, because we of course need it first and foremost for critical energy infrastructure, for our hospitals, kindergartens, schools, to have water supply, so at the water supply power plants and so on. So we have, for example, a children clinic in Chernihiv. This is just, if you're ever in Kyiv, you see generators working at every single cafeteria, and every single building has a small generator. This is one of the main universities in Ukraine. This is a picture from a day before. They have now a solar PV introduced in Kyiv. This is Kyiv Mohyla Academy with a nice view toward the Dnieper River. And this was installed by an oil and gas company, if anything, so that they could have uninterrupted, they could have lights and conferences like this. I think this picture is amazing. And of course, smaller, this is unfortunately fossil fuels, but for now, during the war, you cannot you cannot live without that. But this is the smaller 1 megawatt distributed generation installed in Irpin in Kyiv region. And also, of course, households now also want more renewables. When you live in a big residential block, you also want to have some. And if you have some questions regarding that, ask Svetlana. She has her own solar PV roof installation that they installed in 2022 with their family, and now they also have taking care of it. So it's quite amazing. So what are the key changes in electricity system? Beyond what I just mentioned, of course, we are moving toward decentralized generation because it's more resilient, simply like that. But it's both fossil fuel based and renewable based. And we are fighting from our side to have more renewable-based installations. But the issue is financial resources, because it's just simply easier to buy a generator very quickly than to buy a whole renewable installation. Another problem is that Russia attacked thermal power plants, largely speaking, who are balancing out the energy system. And so we really need storage, lots of different types of storage systems. And so when you cannot just install a solar PV on your roof, you also need to have some kind of capacity to store the energy. And this is getting, even more expensive and more complicated to do. But again, we are trying to find these resources. But then since 2014, Ukraine did an awful lot of things, like establishing an independent energy regulator. I mean, there is some fluctuations about the independence because we're in crisis back and forth, but we did this, this reform was taking place. Electricity market reform, very crucial for Ukraine. The tariffs that also were finally getting closer to market levels. They're still not there, but nevertheless, the connection to the European energy system. I can talk a whole, extra 30 minutes about how that happened. But this happened. Ukraine did connect to the European energy grid in March 2022. And our energy, professionals who did that, I think they are just heroes, what they actually managed to do in just a few weeks. But there was lots of preparation for that. So basically when Russia attacked, Ukraine could, still be working as a united electricity system and then connect to Europe. And we worked on that also, and this is, I think, just impressive. Renewables, I said, diversification, decentralization of the energy system is crucial. And there was a decrease of the role of coal because of occupation of the east of Ukraine. This is also important. I will say a bit more about that. But from the perspective of each of us, of Ukrainians who live now, in Ukraine, what we see is, I would call it democratization of the energy sector. Because energy is scarce, you understand, you start valuing it. And I hear my colleagues talking kilowatts, kilowatt hours, watts, how much storage, do you know a nice electrician, I have this number. They know so much now about the energy sector that they would never have learned before. So I like how Svetlana was saying that indeed any crisis actually makes you, transform, and it's a positive transformation too. So you do have the destruction, but you have people understanding the value of energy and the value of producing your own energy where you are. And this means that our energy system will never be the same again, and it will definitely never return to the same, as we saw here that was built after the Soviet time. Then a few words about coal. Coal, and this is of course, here on the picture you don't see well, but basically it's a destroyed town of Vuhledar in Donetsk region. Vuhledar, and now it's occupied by Russia since actually quite recently. Ukrainians were holding the positions for very long. Vuhledar is the city in Donetsk region that was built with the sole purpose to produce coal. In the middle of the fields, you can see there is just, there is nothingness, and then pop, you have a city, few square kilometers like that, with high-storied buildings, and then you have mines and so on there. We've been working with this city and other cities of Donetsk region on their just transition away from coal. Since 2014, it was clear to them when the front line advanced, it was very important to be moving away from coal because they saw that economically speaking makes no sense. It was already in decline before 2014, and after that, So we were thinking how to diversify their economies, what to do. And they were super active. They were, we were taking them to Brussels to discuss with their counterparts, coal mining cities all over Europe. And they were very active. They really wanted to see the change happen in their cities. Vuhledar, Pokrovsk, Mirnograd. And unfortunately, these are, and I can be telling names, these are the cities that are being now occupied. Russia, whatever they say that they are trying to protect Donbass or something, they basically have been destroying Donbass. They destroyed how Donbass was created to again as this powerhouse, industrial powerhouse. This is all destroyed. The map here, you can see where coal is in Ukraine. It's in the east. So then you would be wondering, so Russians are occupying that part. They probably want resources because very often you see in the news things like, this is a fight for, minerals or resources. But this is not the case, in terms of coal at least. The coal mines have been flooded. They have been flooded because of the military action, but also they have been flooded because of negligence, because nobody needs them, and because basically nobody needs these people who are there in those territories. And unfortunately, the mines that have been flooded since 2014, we don't have any information from there, because that has direct impact on the quality of water there, of people's health and so on. Really not much info. But we really saw how this became, because coal mines are all interconnected under tunnels. In the controlled territories of Ukraine, we saw how the water was going up with very polluted and so on. But in any case, the scale of damage is unclear, and it's kind of environmental catastrophe in itself. The key changes had happened in the coal sector since 2014. Again, this work with on just transition of coal regions has started. But I mentioned to you the Donetsk coal region, but there was also, of course, the coal produced in the west of Ukraine. This is a smaller quantities, but also very important coal production there. And these people are still working on their just transition. So they still want to diversify and move away from coal. And crucially, in Glasgow, at COP26, Ukraine finally set the phase-out date for coal. And honestly, this came as a surprise. We didn't know that they wanted to announce this. But the government decided it was the time, and they confirmed again now, even during the big-scale war, that by 2035, Ukraine would phase out all of the coal-fired power plants. Coal has been replaced by renewables in power generation, and I showed you some graphs before. But then some of these coal capacities which are still there, we still try to repair them because they are crucial to support the energy system running at least somehow. Before we have more storage and so on. Okay, now I have to keep it super short not to run over time. Because gas is also a topic in itself. Gas. Just a few words. I mean, Europe has been just bound to Russian gas. And interestingly enough, after the invasion of 2014, Europe just was importing even more of Russian gas. It became even more dependent. And at its peak, Russian share in European pipeline gas imports was over 40%. So Ukraine was dependent at 40%. When you take all of the gas, a bit less, but a huge share was coming from Russia, all the gas to Europe. And this has been a European policy between 2014 and 2022. Even until recently, and still today, there is many politicians who think it's a great idea. So there was the Turk Stream that started operating. There is, of course, the famous Nord Stream. Well, we're not going into details, but the Nord Stream started, construction of the Nord Stream started after the Russian invasion of 2014. So it was considered normal. Meanwhile, what happened in Ukraine? Ukraine had a huge pipeline going from Russia, connecting, Russia to Europe. And Ukraine was, of course, also a big consumer of Russian gas. What happened is that the government decided to fully, to not be anymore consuming importing Russian gas, at least directly. So we stopped in 2015 all of the direct imports of Russian gas. And trying to convince our European colleagues, what are you doing? Maybe it's not a good idea, but they didn't listen. And we were even told that it would be impossible to be going the other way around, to be importing gas from Europe through the same pipes. So European politicians were saying, you cannot do that, you cannot have reverse gas supplies. It's the same pipe. They said, it's impossible. Do you mean it's impossible? Of course it was possible, it's just people didn't want. So the gas consumption of Russian gas just decreased and became zero, and then we started importing instead from Europe, but the transit also still continued. And a crucial moment came on 1st of January 2025, when finally, and it was because Ukraine just said, guys, we just stop there. So the 1st of January 2025, there is zero Russian gas flowing through the transit pipes through Ukraine. This is the development of the situation. So Ukraine did many steps, and not only it did the reverse flow of gas, through the same pipe from Europe to Ukraine, stopped the imports of Russian gas. It did big, important corporate governance reform of Naftogaz, of our gas and oil company, and regulated the gas market. And because the gas prices increased, they were very much subsidized before. Energy efficiency. And, it's simple things like insulating homes became a thing since 2014. And I myself have been working a lot with the colleagues, and we thought it was, the best climate policy we could have is to have more energy efficient programs for Ukrainians, to insulate home and to be just not wasting gas. And our oil and gas company agreed that it was a great thing to do because of the situation, and 2025 finally. However, what are the next steps for Europe is the LNG, that is still, Europe is buying tons of Russian LNG still, and there is no sanctions for now expected on that, at least in the coming months. And of course there is Turk Stream, so there is this gas that still goes through Turkey to Bulgaria and to Europe, Russian gas that is still there. On nuclear, this is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant occupied by Russians. This is their blackmailing, non-stop. They're setting on fire the water cooling tower or other parts of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. But the occupation of Europe's largest nuclear power plant, it's a horrible thing. It's a ticking time bomb, and hopefully this will be resolved. And this is in the country that had Chernobyl. That was also, from the colonial perspective, was because of Russians. Ukraine, so I mentioned the nuclear power that was producing half of all electricity, so it's very important. And very briefly, Ukraine also did some things here less than in other sectors on nuclear. We were very much dependent on Russian nuclear fuel, so we stopped that fully, while many countries in the world are dependent on Russian nuclear fuel, and they're building together with Russian nuclear power plants, including some countries in Europe. We also built and opened in Chernobyl the spent nuclear fuel storage, because what Ukraine was doing, we were sending to Russia our spent, used nuclear fuel and paying for Russia to store it, because we didn't have own storage. So we have now own storage, but I think the capacity is still not enough to store all of the fuel. I have to check that. And then finally we have some discussions in the society, because the government really wants to build more nuclear capacities in Ukraine. And finally we start having some discussions, which I think is good, about is it a good idea. We'll see how that develops, but it's already a good movement ahead. So on the energy sector, I stop here. I guess it's lots of information. Sorry for that. Really lots of information. Now it's going to be short. A bit on climate and a bit on decolonization. On climate policies, unfortunately burned forests because of the Russian invasion, many of them. If you look at, coming back to, if you think of what Svetlana was saying, and the climate change, who caused climate change? Who are historically the biggest contributors to climate change? The US, China, the third is Russia, and somewhere number, I think 11, is Ukraine, between Canada and France. First of all, you should ask yourself, how is that possible? Between Canada and France, there is Ukraine, as one of the largest contributors to climate change. And here, think about the colonial past, and I will come back to that in a second. This is a complicated graph, but just if you look just here, 1990, just before the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukrainian greenhouse gas emissions were up there. Then we ended up in 2000 here, and after Russian invasion of 2014, it went even down. Because we lost territories, but also, of course, we lost lots of industrial capacities. Well, lost, or they became less important in the 90s. And this is an important graph in a way, if you work with climate issues. What happened here so most of the countries in the world, when they pledge, we will decrease our greenhouse gas emissions. And they say we will decrease from the 1990 level by 30%, 50%, by whatever percent. So when countries of the post-Soviet bloc say we will decrease or we will reduce our greenhouse gas emissions from the 1990 level by 50%, this is a lot. But they already did it because of the economic decrease. It just happened by itself, basically. You didn't have to do anything. But most of the countries always use 1990 as a level where, as a, how it's called, baseline year. And because of this, Russia, Ukraine, and other countries, during the Kyoto Protocol times, were able to, we call it sell hot air, to sell the greenhouse gas emission reductions that really were already done. But receiving money to have some, projects and so on. So climate policies of before 2014 and all of that, it was very much, how to say, more like a play. It was not serious. It was about the emissions reduction that already happened. And what happened in 2014 is that Ukraine actually became more serious, and it pledged, it signed Paris agreements, and it pledged during Glasgow? I think so. To keep the emissions stable or even decrease them a little bit by 2030. So this was the change in the policies when Ukraine actually said, we actually want to do something. We need money for that, yes, but we want to work on climate policies. And in addition to that, we have the war, and we have the climate impact of the war, and this is something that Ackermann has been doing with the international initiative on greenhouse gas emissions reduction from war, and I saw that Leonard, who is the main author there, is maybe online with us, trying to look into the impact of the conflict on climate. Again, I will not go into details because of the lack of time, but This is one of the important and new areas that not many are looking into, because you can also put a price tag on the climate damage because it has its own price. And current price tag is 32 billion of climate damage that Russia did because of its war in Ukraine. I think I will not be talking about this. I'll come back to that. But this is about green reconstruction. There is many things here. I talked you through. I think we talked through all of them. But Ukrainian climate policy was kind of from almost non-existent, or more like like a game, to actually became more serious. Unfortunately, since 22, the government simply does not have enough capacity to be working in climate. So you cannot really demand. And they're cutting out the staff at who work on climate because it's not a priority. But nevertheless, we confirm our climate targets, and we understand that this is also important from the perspective of development of the economy, the green, having a greener economy and so on. And one more important thing that I think inspires me the most when people say, is climate at all relevant during the war? Like, it's crazy, it doesn't make sense. One thing is this climate damage during conflicts, and also from the militaries, which is important and a whole topic in itself. But also our cities became just incredible. So since 2014, hundreds of Ukrainian cities joined the European Covenant of Mayors initiatives, and they have been working on their national energy and climate plans. They are pledging together with European cities to reduce emissions, and to be working on that. And that helped them. Many cities could go through 2022 through occupation, or Russians approaching, having no energy, and because they were working on implementation of their energy and climate plans, they diversified their energy resources, they decentralized their energy production locally, and that helped them to actually survive. So climate policy has a very, very practical, very concrete results that we saw and experienced in Ukraine. And the cities who did that, they say, oh my God, this was the best thing we've ever done, we should be continuing. So throughout this full-scale war, they still keep working on their climate, energy, policy, plans, climate mitigation, climate adaptation, because they understand how important it is. And last, I promise this is last. I did too many slides, I'm sorry. Small breath, and that's it. Decolonization. I mean, this part is new, so let's see. I'm sure that some of you actually know much more about that than me. But yeah, first of all, it's great to see in IPCC reports, Svetlana, we hope there will be even more on that. In IPCC, that vulnerability of countries, ecosystems, people to climate change, about all of the causes that there is also the historical and ongoing patterns of inequity and colonialism that has an impact. And it is true. However, when we meet with the global climate community, very often everybody thinks about the global south, global north divide, not about Ukraine or Russia. And this is the big gap. So whoever studies, or whoever is searching for interesting topics to research, I think it's a very interesting topic. And also because I love this. So there is an amazing analysis by Carbon Brief that they did in 2021 or 22, I think, that shows how colonial rule boosts European share of historical emissions, and not only European share. So they claim that when you're as a colonizer, you're responsible also for your colonies and the emissions there. So then it changes the paradigm, and it changes how much of the emissions you're actually emissions and climate you're responsible for, climate change you're responsible for. And Russia stands out a lot because here in red is the colony, so Ukraine would be a part of Russia's influence and Russia's responsibility. And then if we look at today, we see that colonial powers are the top cumulative emitters per population. In Russia is again, it's there. It's number 3. This is the same graph as I showed you, and this is almost the last slide, okay? This graph is a bit complicated, but very interesting if you look into details. But this is Russia's climate targets. Same story from the 1990, how the emissions were dropping. But Russia, basically, they say, yeah, we will be reducing emissions from the 1990 level by 2030. We will be here in 2030. Basically, what Russia does, they say, we will be increasing our greenhouse gas emissions. This is our climate pledge. And it's fine, and the international community cannot do absolutely anything because all of this is kind of voluntary. So well, voluntary, yeah, you have to submit your climate goal. This is the climate goal. It says reduction, it's reduction. So Russia basically uses this system, and of course it claims it's not responsible for anything else. But at the same time, it's very interested to include in its data sets, so in the statistics it submits, even on climate, to the UNFCCC, to UN Secretariat of Climate Change, it's very interested to include the newly occupied Ukrainian territories. So every report Russia submits, it tries to include not only Crimea now, but also other occupied territories. There you go. So Russian climate policies are inexistent. It's more about, for them, again, this is more geopolitics rather than anything else. We did with the colleagues a few articles trying to look into climate and decolonization and where Russia plays a role. And I just give you, a few links there if you're interested to look into details, because, again, there is a lot that also could be said. But again, studying this intersection between colonialism and Russia's place in it and climate is important. So my last slide is here. This is something that usually brings hope. This is a Ukrainian environmentalist, Vadim Manyuk, who is very, very popular now. So he is the person who studies, among other, because there's other environmentalists, who looks into what happened after Kakhovka Dam disaster. He goes there and he explores. And at the Kakhovka Reservoir, we have now a huge forest growing. One of the largest forests in Eastern Europe. There used to be water, now there is a forest. And Mr. Vadim has millions of views on YouTube because he just goes around this forest and explains what is out there. Look, there is a bug here. Look, this is nice. Biodiversity is coming back. What is there? People love that because this brings hope. The Ukrainian government said that they want to rebuild the dam because this is usually usually you say, I had something, now I want it back. I want it the same way that it used to be before. While many other people think, hey, but maybe this is actually much better. And because this is also the way Ukraine was before Russia decided to come to colonize and to make its own use of Ukrainian resources. This is how the south of Ukraine looked like before. And what Svetlana was saying, that the south of Ukraine may be experiencing the more droughts because of climate change and so on. But that's also the natural, this is the way the south of Ukraine has been. It has been dry. It's more natural climate. It was not supposed to be having so much water, or if you have water, it would be gained differently. And it's a historically very important space. So hopefully there will be also, and there is more reflections about how Ukraine should look like. And again, this gives hope. And I'm stopping here. If you want to check the presentation in more details in an environment where I don't take you through everything, there is the link and the QR code. And there will be no conclusion except to say that there is so much that still could be done and studied. And to be honest, we are not many and we don't have enough hands and minds to do everything that we want on all of those intersections and of different topics. Well, they are super interesting and important. So thank you for that, and sorry for